I'm not great at making up theories or piecing together the more complex parts of lore. My brain gets mixed up with all the different information, and since English isn't really my first language, reading between the lines can sometimes be difficult for me. But even if I can't figure out whether Amphoreus is a time loop or who the real villain is between the Black Tide and the Crisis Heirs themselves, when it comes to relationships, there are certain patterns that point to a very obvious conclusion, or at least obvious to me and people like me. So today I'm going to explain my Honkai Star Rail theory, a theory that I'm sure no one has ever mentioned before. The theory of Phaidei. Okay, maybe it's not a theory, but more like a deep dive into their lore together and an analysis of their relationship for those who need all the juicy details of their past, present, and possible future outcomes. While this will mostly focus on why these two are significant to each other as brothers in arms and as friends, we'll also be exploring the possible romantic relationship between Phaidon and Mayday. If that isn't your cup of tea, please move on to something more to your interest, because we're definitely going to touch on the shipping parts here. When we first meet Mayday and Phaidon, they seem somewhat antagonistic towards each other. Their voices and mannerisms come across as rough, even inhospitable. But as you get to know them, it becomes clear that this is just a front for what's actually a deeply intimate relationship. Their abrasive way of speaking is simply how they communicate, a style likely shaped primarily by Phaidon, who, in these Okhema memory fragments, visibly struggles to connect with his colleague. However, through trial and error, the two finally find a way to communicate, albeit quite rough and riddled with challenges. But before we take a deep dive into how they communicate, let's start with the most basic thing: the beginning, the start of Phaidon and Mayday's story together. And that would bring us to the book As I've Written. Written in its pages is the first meeting between Phaidon and Mayday. As we see here, they met on a battlefield. At the time, the Cremnoan detachment stood against the flame chase journey, an obstacle, as you will. Aglaia might have been the one to send Phaidon in the first place, to possibly recruit the man and his army to their cause. They knew Mayday would be crucial to the prophecy, and Mayday probably knew that too at this point. But how could one get such a man like Mayday to join a cause? Well, by sending someone who could be his equal. If you look closely at the 3.0 promotional videos, Aglaia's golden threads visibly connect Phaidon and Mayday. This may suggest she knew that they were bound by some shared fate, and as we've seen with her character, she'd absolutely use that connection to further the prophecy's goals. Others may also interpret this to be a nod to the red string of fate that traditionally binds lovers. The romantic interpretation is admittedly a shipper's perspective, but given that Aglaia is the demigod of romance, and this is a shipping video, I'd argue that viewpoint is very justified here.
True friends? No way.
We also know that their meeting likely occurred before Mayday killed his father, and more interestingly, before the death of one of his closest friends. If you played the 3.1 story quest, the name Hephaestion might have immediately stood out. As someone who loves history and myth, I recognized it instantly and was tickled that they would use such a particular name for someone in-game. For those of you who didn't recognize him, let me give you a small refresher of high school history. Born in 356 BC, Alexander the Great built one of history's largest empires. His inner circle included the somatophilics, from the Greek soma, meaning body, and philos, meaning friend. They were an elite guard who served both as protectors and advisors. For our purposes, the most notable of Alexander's were Leonidas, Perdiccas, Ptolemy, Peucistus, and you guessed it, Hephaestion. Their relationship is hotly debated, but Hephaestion and Alexander grew up as inseparable friends, mirroring Phaidei and his Hephaestion. At one point, Hephaestion even became Alexander's second in command. And like his in-game counterpart, the historical Hephaestion died of illness. Alexander's overwhelming grief has led many scholars to interpret them as lovers. Now, whether Phaidei and his Hephaestion were romantically involved is unclear, but this parallel could suggest some queer coding for Phaidei. At minimum, it lays groundwork for his potential attraction to this new, shiny, armored-clad man that has just appeared in his life. Now, in my own headcanon, I like to imagine Hephaestion staying simply as a best friend, watching the 10-night battle from the sidelines and teasing Phaidei for finally meeting someone who could match him blow for blow. After all, this is how Phaidei's own parents had famously met. And this mirroring of fated battles and partnerships are almost a bit too deliberate to ignore. Gorgo, mother of Phaidei, met Euryphon, the previous king of Castrum Kremnos, at the end of the Kremnos festival, and battled him to a draw. As this battle grew to a close and no winner could truly be named, Euryphon instead proposed to Gorgo, asking her to become his queen, saying they were both matched in skill, will, and displayed the 5 great virtues of Kremnos. This is a bit of an insert here since this happens much later, but Phainon does suggest that they recreate the Kremnos festival together during the 3.0 story. And this line carries way more significance than he might have known, considering that Euryphon proposed to Gorgo there. Now, obviously, Phaidei didn't instantly propose to Phainon when they drew to a close on that 10-day battle. Otherwise, there really wouldn't be a need for this video. But instead, one could theorize that Phainon probably did propose something of his own. And no, we aren't talking about Phaidei's mother's signet, though one could argue that that was a proposal of some sort. But instead, we're talking about an alliance with Aglaia, or, if anything, a position as the mercenary army of the Flame Chase journey. For you see, the Kremnoan detachment were exiles, likely ill-equipped despite their fierce reputation. Aglaia's money could have helped them to achieve their ultimate goal, to overthrow King Euryphon. Considering the timeline, this could also be the time that Hephaestion fell ill. The desperation to get his remaining friend help may have been what finally pushed Phaidei to accept Aglaia's deal, as well as his role in the Flame Chase journey. Of course, most of this is just speculation, assumptions woven to make sense of Phaidei's choice at the time. He likely knew he'd have to join the Flame Chase eventually, and I think that this meeting between him and Phainon would have been the turning point, regardless of any other influences, pushing him to finally do what needed to be done. After killing his father, Phaidei probably only spent a little time in his homeland. With the Black Tide and the Mad Titan reducing the great city to ruins, he made the decision to abandon the high walls of Castrum Kremnos, leading his people to Okhema instead. There, he remained as a protector, alongside a certain snowy-haired swordsman. It is possible they had some interactions before Phaidei's permanent residence in Okhema, with Castrum Kremnos being a problem for many even before its fall, and the Black Tide always looming. They would have needed to work together. Phainon might have even served as a liaison between the detachment and Okhema, helping them navigate schemes and battlefields as Aglaia's mercenary force. While there is little known about what exactly transpired between the Crumnoans' initial joining of the flame chase journey and the present day, especially when it comes to Phainon and 𝑺𝒖𝒑𝒑𝒐𝒓𝒕 relationship, I think we can at least talk about one conversation that they had in their Okhema Fragments of Memory, a conversation that probably took place after Phaidei moved permanently to Okhema, but it could have been at any time after their initial meeting. It's obvious that Phainon was the one who initially insisted on their friendship. This isn't to say that Phaidei was shy or awkward. In fact, he's quite well-spoken. Rather, he seems more unsure of how to respond to someone as naturally outgoing and talkative as Phainon. The fragment shows Phainon trying different approaches until something finally stuck. And once he found a way to communicate with Phaidei, he latched onto it, pushing until they grew closer. On the shipping side of things, their conversation sounds like a confession. Phainon seeks out Phaidei at the bath, and of course it's the baths. The man has no subtlety, where he admires Phaidei's body and strength, the "until I met you" phrasing, the deliberate attempts to hold Phaidei's attention. It's quite obvious what kind of intention he had. It's Phainon at his most transparent, even attempting to disguise asking Phaidei out on a date as a training exercise.
If you want might, he's got might. If you want wisdom, he's got might. And if you want humor, he's got might.
After this, their story continues in 3.0 and 3.1, and while I could analyze every single glance and exchange word between them, that would take hours. So instead, I'll focus on the truly noteworthy moments, those interactions that reveal the most about their dynamic. And one of the things I did notice while going through their story was that Phainon usually instigated their challenges, while Phaidei might reciprocate to keep their score even. The first move usually comes from Phainon, at least in the moments we've seen.
He taunts me every time we meet. I thought he was born with that.
You've got quite the talent for taunting people too, huh?
I wouldn't call this a case of pigtail pulling exactly, but it's certainly reminiscent of someone fumbling for ways to spend time with the person they're drawn to. It seems that over time, what began as a way to engage Phaidei became a habit, even as they outgrew the need for such indirect communication. I think that this is partially because Phaidei indulges it, not out of pride or competitiveness, but because he knows it settles Phainon's nerves, whether those nerves stem from their relationship or external pressures. In a way, I think they use it to navigate difficult moments, like when Phaidei returned to Kremnos after years away, or when Phainon, still reeling from his failed trial, needs to lighten the mood.
What? You're chickening out already?
Get lost. Do whatever you want.
I also want to emphasize that their entire dynamic seems to be built on these small challenges, the maintaining of a balance between them. No one side can ever be more than the other. Being equal is part of their equation, always recalibrating to ensure that neither gains permanent ground over the other. These challenges aren't just a part of their relationship. They're a way that they can stay equal in each other's eyes, even as one goes on to become the demigod of strife. Their concern for each other extends far beyond these little challenges. During the 3.0 story, Phaidei grows visibly anxious when separated from Mayday for too long, despite knowing full well that Mayday is immortal. He's so anxious, in fact, that he'd rather kill Oronex than talk sense to the Titan if it would return him to Mayday faster. Meanwhile, in Mayday's case, he made sure to arrange backup plans with Aglaia should Phaidei fail his trial, seemingly preparing for this even before Phaidei stepped into the trial. He even comes to comfort Phaidei afterward, pushing through his own discomfort with emotional support because he recognizes that Phaidei needs it. The depths of their trust becomes clearest in combat. Some might interpret their fighting stance as Phaidei passively playing defense while Mayday takes offense, but I see it a bit differently. Given Mayday's more reckless, immortality-reliant style of fighting, Phaidei actively assumes the role of guarding his one vulnerability, though the Flame Reaver's strike at that weak point does raise some unsettling questions, ones I'm absolutely not qualified to theorize about. It casts a shadow over their future, one where Phaidei is not guarding his back, but the one attacking it.
But he's not pulling any punches. He just sees defense as unnecessary baggage.
Mayday doesn't just trust Phaidei with his physical weakness. He entrusts him with something far more personal, the memory of his closest friends. While the rest of the Cremnoan detachment likely knew about his friends, Mayday's deliberate sharing of their names with Phaidei feels like he's ensuring that someone will remember their significance to him if he fails in his mission. It's also at this time when he explains that HKS nickname that he has for Phaidei, a term he is clearly fond of given how it's etched onto his teleslate. Though one could argue that this is a word that he used towards his father, I think it's plausible that this word was used for Phaidei in the privacy of his own mind, one that shifted in meaning and now has become one that he finally feels comfortable saying to Phaidei himself out loud. What makes their partnership work is how perfectly their differences align. Mayday's natural caution creates a counterweight to Phaidei's impulsiveness. Where Mayday presents reserved authority, Phaidei offers approachable enthusiasm. And then there's the way they're always standing just a little bit closer than necessary. All these pieces form a picture of mutual understanding that goes well beyond the typical friendship. But don't only take my word about their relationship. The rest of the actual characters in games see them in a similar light. For example, Castris sees them as a package deal, going so far as to inquire when one is missing from the pair. Aglaia, who reads people like open books, specifically notes how they behave differently around each other. And even Owlbert, our most trusted relayer of information, comments on their relationship during our introduction to Mayday.
Oh, you two truly are friends till death do you part.
But I think it's time to get to the most notable part of their relationship, and that is Phaidei's ridiculous fascination with Mayday's body. To be quite honest, I feel like anything I say at this point will not really encompass how much Phaidei talks about Mayday's body. In fact, I would say that this is his obsession, his incurable obsession. So, instead of me rambling on about all the times that Phaidei has talked about Mayday's body, let's just hear from Mayday himself.
That immortal body soaks up damage like a sponge. Trust me, I've tested it myself.
There is certainly way more to analyze here, but this feels like the right place to pause. With future Amphoreus updates on the horizon, we'll undoubtedly gain new context and lore that will help us understand them more. And of course, there are a few more observations I've held back on simply because I need more time to analyze them, or their full significance to find on in my day still needs some time to unfold. So drop your theories, predictions, or even your favorite moments between them in the comments. I've mostly been neck deep in textual analysis, so I haven't had much time to indulge in the fandom side of things. And I'd love to hear how you guys have decided to interpret their relationship. And if you have enjoyed this, do consider liking or subscribing, as I'm sure I'll have to make a part 2 of this eventually.